Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for coming to today's 4-H QuaranTEEN Virtual Science Café. I'm Laura Wilson, 4-H science professional, and I'm really glad you could join us today. 4-H is a community for all kids with programs that suit a variety of backgrounds, interests, budgets, and schedules. From in-school to after-school, clubs to camps, our youth development programs are available in your local community. And we welcome every kid who wants to have fun, learn, and grow. 4-H is the youth development program of the University of Maine, brought to you by UMaine Cooperative Extension. I hope you all take a minute to introduce yourself in the chat box. If you share your name and your town, that would be perfect. I'm going to share a quick poll just to see how you have heard about us today. In the meantime, I just want to go over a few quick guidelines, some stuff you should know to help this all go smoothly. Just share your thoughts, introduce yourself, put questions for our speaker today in the Q&A box. And Jesse will moderate those questions and make sure that our speaker today has access and answers them all for you. Just please be courteous and respectful, and don't create any distractions in the chat box. Just so you know, we are not able to see you and we are not able to hear you. So the way to communicate with us today is in that chat box, or if you have questions for our speaker, it's to put those questions in the Q&A box. So we're going to keep the session super simple. Thank you for filling out the poll. Our guest is going to share some of her cool research and share a bit about herself today. And she's got some great photos to share. So I'm really excited about it today. We're going to have plenty of time for you to ask questions. We're going to use that Q&A box, remember, at the bottom or top of your screen to get questions to her. Here at Maine 4-H, we have Dr. Vanessa Klein and Alice Philbrick monitoring the chat and Jesse Brainerd hosting our Q&A, so we don't miss any of your questions. Thank you again for tuning in. I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and it is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Caitlin Howell. Dr. Howell, really excited to have you here with us today. Would you please tell our participants about yourself and about your work?
Yes, absolutely. And thank you very much for the invitation to be here. Thank you, Laura and Jesse, for setting this up. I think it's a fabulous idea, and I'm excited to be here and to chat with all of you students over there out in internet land. Hello. So I'm going to start out just by sharing my screen. So please let me know you are seeing the thing I want you to see. You should see a big leaf with the title on it. All right, then away we go. All right. Yes, as Laura mentioned, my name is Caitlin Howell. I am a professor of biomedical engineering at the University of Maine, but I actually do something kind of special and unique that I'm excited to share with you today. I do bio-inspired engineering. Now, you may have heard about this a little bit here and there, but I'm going to talk a little bit more about it. And by the end of this presentation, you're going to be pros. All right, so first of all, we're going to start out, what is bio-inspired engineering? So if we were in person, I would ask you to raise your hand if you've heard of it. Some people have, some people haven't. But in essence, what it is looking at nature for the ways that nature solves problems. Now, nature has had millions of years to find creative solutions to some of the most challenging problems that exist. And it has done an amazing job of it. And so we fairly recently, as human beings, we've realized that we can actually look at nature and copy the way that nature is solving these problems, but take it even one step further and improve those solutions to make them into exactly what we need them to be. So I'm going to start out today with a question for you, a nice poll question here. What do you think the first example of bio-inspired engineering actually was? And you'll see up on your screen now some options. We have wheels, we have sunscreen, we have airplanes, or we have Velcro. So please go ahead, log your answer. Please don't be shy. Actually, any of the answers are good. As soon as we can move on here. All right, do we have some answers?
We are getting answers in. We've got a couple more people who haven't answered yet, so I'm going to give it another 30 seconds or so, and then I'll share your results with you.
Okay. Be interesting to see. Thanks, what?
And as people do respond to these polls, these are anonymous responses, so go ahead and take your best guess as well. All right, I think all the answers must be in. I'm going to share your results.
Ooh, nice. Nice. That is excellent. All right. So those of you who answered Velcro, you are correct. So the reason why it's Velcro, you might be kind of surprised because that's a fairly recent invention, right? How could it possibly be Velcro? We've been living in nature since, since we first started to exist. How is it possible that we've only really started to figure this out with Velcro? Well, it's actually a really interesting story. So Velcro was first invented by a Swiss guy. He was having kind of a bad day because his wife was really complaining because the style in Switzerland when this was happening, which is around the 1940s, was having tiny little buttons that went all the way down the back of your dress. And she was getting really, really sick of having to spend so much time putting together those buttons. So George said, forget it, I'm getting out of the house. And he went for a walk in the hills with his dog. And as he was walking along, what did he notice on his dog? Burrs. And he went, I wonder if this could solve both my wife's problems and my problems at the same time. And sure enough, it could. But the reason why this was only able to happen now was because this was around the same time that another invention had happened, and that was nylon. So you all know how Velcro works. I guarantee you have it around the house, right? You look really closely, you will notice that the harder part of it is actually made of nylon. And that nylon is a very important material. It's a synthetic material, but it's important because it will allow you to connect and break that Velcro over and over and over. And it actually takes quite a long time before the Velcro is useless. So that is the example of not just copying nature, which is biomimicry, but actually taking it to the next level. Burrs, when they work, their spikes break. They're good for one time and that's it. But now we have taken that concept and made it something that we can use over and over and over again. Bioinspired engineering. So along that concept, let's go on. I'm going to tell you about some of the other really, really fascinating examples of bioinspired engineering that are just starting to come online right now because of materials that are being invented. So take a look at this one, an octopus. You've probably all seen octopus either through videos or maybe you've been able to go down to an aquarium, but they can do some pretty incredible things. So I'd like to ask you here question number 2 for our poll. Here are some beautiful examples of an octopus and what an octopus can do. So if you start to look at that and start to think a little bit like an engineer, which of these ideas do you think that scientists have recently picked up on and are running with? Taking the concepts presented by an octopus and being able to turn them into something that can solve human problems. Right, we have color changing material, a new class of robots, new type of swimming machine, or a computer algorithm for controlling 8 arms at once. And again, totally anonymous, so don't be afraid to take a guess.
We're up to about 70% of people have voted, so we'll give people another 30 seconds or so, and then I'll share the results.
So the octopus pictures that I have chosen are a little bit of a hint here.
All right, looks like not everybody's jumping in to take a chance right now, but I'm going to share the results that we have.
All right, that's okay. This was a hard one. And actually, if I had put a cephalopod, most of you would be right with a color changing material. That is absolutely a really cool thing that scientists have picked up on and that they are really working hard to be able to mimic. But actually this one is a little bit different because the answer is robots. So have you seen that picture that I have up there? Do you know what that's from? It's from a movie called I, Robot, which if you haven't seen it, it's kind of fun. But one of the things that really interests me about that is that the robots that they show in that movie are not hard metal all over the place. They actually have soft parts on them, right? A lot of future envisioning of robots, they have soft parts because that allows us, our soft parts allow us to do a lot of very interesting things. So people looked at that and they said, okay, well, and now my screen is frozen. There we go. Okay. Well, hey, look what these octopi can do. They can actually change their shape. They can squeeze into places. They can make themselves bigger, and they do it without bones. They do it without any hard parts at all. Can we take that concept and can we apply it to things that we're interested in? And of course, the answer is yes. What you're looking at is called a soft robotic actuator. An actuator is just a word for something that moves in a robot. This one is made entirely out of soft parts. It's effectively a fancy balloon. And so the octopus will fill itself with fluid to make itself bigger. Well, they're just filling with air. And they've designed it in such a way that when they fill that with air, it will bend and create an actuation, a movement. So, okay, what can we actually do with this? Well, quite a bit, it turns out. So what you're looking at down there on the bottom on the left is a picture of a soft robotic hand that is picking up an egg. That thing has no hard parts in it, so there's significantly less risk that it's going to be damaging that fragile object. And taking that a step further to human problems, what you see there on the right is actually a hand, a glove that's been made to assist people with grabbing objects. So if you've ever known anyone who has Parkinson's disease or has seen videos of people with Parkinson's disease, you might know that they have trouble keeping their hands still and grasping objects. So this glove was designed to be able to assist that, but to have no hard parts. So there's significantly less risk that it's going to hurt the people that it is trying to help. So another example of bio-inspired engineering, but definitely keep the eyes out for that color changing material because that's coming up next. So speaking of, I have an example of some stuff for you. The morpho butterfly. So some of you may have seen some of these butterflies. There aren't too many of them around here in Maine, but if you've gone to butterfly gardens, you might have seen them. The morpho butterfly is well known for this beautiful shimmery blue color. So scientists started to look into this a little bit, say, I wonder what's making this color. So they took these guys under their microscope and they zoomed in and they saw the butterfly scales, where those are pretty, but they don't really tell you a whole lot. They then took them and put them in their even bigger microscopes, their electron microscopes, and saw this. Now this is a really interesting structure. What you're looking at are tiny, fine little scales that are vertical and very, very, very small. They're on the nanometer. So they looked at these and started to realize that what was happening was that this butterfly wing, these scales, were controlling the way that light interacted. So here's my question 3. What could this potentially inspire? What do you think? Poll question. I bet this one's going to be a lot easier because I gave you a bunch of hints. So a new way to flap wings, new way to direct sunlight, making tiny structures, or a new way of making colors.
About 80% of our guests today have voted already. They're really quick.
Yep.
We'll give it another couple seconds and then close it out.
This one's a little bit easier, but I still tried to throw a little bit of a challenge at you. Can't make it too easy. You're all smart kids.
And here are your results.
You are very close. Yes. All right. So the answer is actually a new way to make colors. Although I am looking forward to the time when people can take this concept that I'm about to tell you about and use it as a way to direct sunlight, because that is the next step. But the first thing is, can we copy what this butterfly is doing? Now, the reason why what the butterfly is doing is actually pretty cool. It's because if you remember to some of the physics you might have taken, that colors are frequently made from pigments, right? These materials that can reflect the color, but they will actually fade after a period of time, especially if they're in direct sunlight. The thing about making colors with using this structure, it's called structural color, is that that color never fades because you're not requiring a pigment to make it happen. So it turns out that we can actually reproduce this structural color by making some materials. They don't look exactly like the butterfly wings, but they have the same effect because it's the same concept of a regularly structured material with parts that are on the nanoscale. What you're looking at is called a synthetic opal, like the stone, because this is how the stone makes that color as well. They're tiny, tiny spheres, about 400 nanometers in diameter. And if you stack them up in ways that they're regularly ordered and hit that with white light, then that light will actually be refracted off of the surface in specific color bands. On the other hand, if it's disordered, then you just get regular scattering and it just kind of looks like a dull whitish color. Oh, cool. Okay, so we can make these materials and we can get that iridescence, that shimmery color. What can we do with it? Because we don't want to just reproduce what nature does. We want to take it another step further. Well, turns out that when you do this, not only can you make these colors, but you can make these colors appear exactly when you want them to. This is an example of some work that was being done by a colleague of mine. And what he was able to do is actually put a pattern into the material so that you would see only the shimmery butterfly effect when it was in air. But as soon as you put it into water, you would see a butterfly appear. That was the pattern he chose. But even better, if you submerged it in another different type of liquid, in this case he used ethanol, he was able to make words appear. So that was an example of being able to take that concept and be able to take it one step further and make it into something potentially useful. He was using this as a chemical detection system, right? Okay, all right. So by now you might be wondering, this is so cool. How on earth can I become the type of engineer that does bio-inspired engineering? Well, there are lots of different ways to get into this, but I will tell you about my path in particular. So I'm from Maine originally. I'm from the Oxford Hills area. I went to Oxford Hills Comprehensive High School. And after that, I actually went to the University of Maine here in Orono for both my bachelor's degree and my master's degree. I studied biology, but I also studied mathematics, which made it a lot easier to get into engineering. So after that, while I was at the University of Maine, I studied wood decay fungi. So that might not sound glamorous, but it was actually really, really, really cool. And it gave me the opportunity to get involved very early in research, which I highly, highly recommend for those of you who are thinking of going to college and who are interested in potentially doing some sort of STEM field. Getting involved right from the start in research is a fabulous way to get going. So after that, I decided to go to Germany. I had some German colleagues there who were working with some amazing, amazing technologies. So I went to Germany and I studied physical chemistry. In particular, I was looking at DNA on surfaces using really, really, really big lasers that could burn my eyes out. I saw a lot of really cool things with these lasers, but I really liked my eyes. So I decided I would keep going with that and instead move into this field of bio-inspired engineering. I went to Harvard and I started to do a postdoc there. And that was because at Harvard, they have a very special place called the Wyss Institute for Biologically Inspired Engineering. So this was started by a man named Hans-Jörg Wyss, who started a company in his 40s and became a billionaire. And he did what most of us have done on some level, and that is sit there and go, if I had $1 billion, what would I do? Except the difference was that he actually had $1 billion. And he decided that the thing that he most wanted to do in the world was to start a science institute where he took people with really cool ideas about how to mimic and use things from nature and turn them into solutions for people and problems that we are facing. And it was an amazing place to work. And those two examples that I just gave you, both of those were being done at the Wyss Institute. But when I arrived, I was actually interested in something a little bit different. So when I came, the group that I ended up joining was working on this thing here, the Nepenthes pitcher plant. So now the way that this pitcher plant actually manages to get insects down into the base of the cup, have you ever thought about that? What insect in its right mind would ever go down into the base of a pitcher plant? Well, it turns out that this plant has a really clever way of making that happen. You see, when it's dry outside, for this particular plant, ants and other insects can walk along this pitcher just fine. It has a texture on that top surface of the plant, that peristome. But when it rains, that's when the interesting stuff starts to happen. So a combination of capillary action on that textured surface, on that peristome, combined with a type of water-loving nectar that the plant exudes on the top, both of those things together serve to trap a thin layer of the rainwater on the surface of the pitcher. So what happens then, and I think my video stopped. Let's see if I can restart this for you. Here we go. All right, so what happens is that water becomes trapped in a thin layer, and the ants and other insects have oils on their feet. They go to step on this and they effectively go hydroplaning down into the base of the cup. So that's a pretty clever thing, something that we didn't understand until 2004, but now we do. So I have a question for you, and that is, what type of technology do you think this might be useful for inspiring? What do you think? A better method of catching bugs, a new way of using water, way to make a natural non-sticky surface, or a new type of surface texture? Feel like we need the Jeopardy music here.
This is fascinating to me. I'm wondering, while we are waiting for people to submit their answer to the poll questions, if anybody does have a question, remember you can put it in the Q&A box for Dr. Howell. We have almost 80% of the participants have answered the poll question already, so I will close it down in about 30 seconds and share the answers.
All right, let your imaginations run wild, because that is in fact the best way to do bio-inspired engineering.
And Dr. Howell, one thing people might not know is what a postdoc means. I think people are pretty familiar with what a college degree is, maybe a master's and a PhD, but can you explain a postdoc?
Yes, absolutely. A postdoc is just postdoctoral. It's what you do after you get a PhD. You don't have to do it, but a lot of people do, because it's a new way to learn, or it's a way to learn a new set of skills. So for instance, I did a postdoc. I went there to do research at the Wyss Institute because I wanted to learn about bio-inspired materials. I knew about chemistry, I knew about biology. So I went here and I was able to pick up a new set of skills, and I could bring what I learned from my undergrad degree and my graduate degree, mix it together from what I learned with this experience, and then take that when I found my own research lab.
And we did have a question come in on the Q&A. We have the question, why do the ants have oil on their feet?
Ah, yes, that is a very good question. That is because it is part of their method to stick to surfaces, actually, because oil can be very good to help you stick to things, so they need to climb all over. So the ants will actually have two parts of their feet. They will have a claw that helps them grab into things, and then they will have this oil, this sticky oil, which allows them to create more of a surface bond and allow them to climb up things and hang upside down on things. Right? Hope that answers the question. Very good question. Yep. All right, so we see, yes, new type of surface texture. That is a very good guess. But those of you who answered a new way to make a non-sticky surface, that is what my colleagues had seen in this particular example. So they looked at this and they said, I wonder if we can steal this idea and use it to make everything not stick, not just ants, but everything. And it turns out that that is actually fairly easy to do. Turns out that all you have to do is follow 3 simple steps. You have to roughen your surface, like that textured surface of the plant. You have to have some sort of what I call, what's called functionalization, but that's just a chemical on the surface that your liquid will want to stick to. So the pitcher plant uses that nectar, but we can use other things. And then we have to add the liquid that we want on top. So the pitcher plant uses water because it wants to repel oil, right? And water and oil are immiscible. So that works really well for ant feet. But we want to repel things that are both oil-based and water-based. We want to repel everything. So they make liquids for that too, it turns out. You can pick a liquid that's what's called omniphobic. It repels both oil and water. So we put that on the surface, and as soon as we do, we get this ultra slippery surface. They called it slippery liquid infused porous surfaces, or SLIPS. It's always important to have a good acronym in science, and they did for this one. So they ran around trying it on all the different things they could find in the lab. What you're seeing there is crude oil. That stuff is nasty. It is sticky. It sticks to everything. It's a real problem when we have oil spills, but they were putting it directly on these slip surfaces and it was coming right off, where it was sticking to Teflon and it was sticking to aluminum. So in addition to this, they were using, let's see if these are going to work. Yep, down here you see oil with metal shavings being dropped onto glass. And then up there in the top right, you can see spray paint, right? So this was working against everything that they can find in the lab, and it was very exciting. But I, of course, was most interested in living things. I studied biology. I like life. I like natural, those types of sciences. So we were looking at how these things repel bacteria. Bacteria are really, really good at sticking things. If you ever wake up in the morning and have gunk on your teeth, that's how good they are. Bacteria stick to lots of things and they cause lots of different problems, including infections in hospitals. So right now in my research lab, we are using this type of technology to be able to create materials that can stop bacteria from sticking to surfaces, to stop things like infections from taking place in catheters in hospitals. Okay, but I want to keep going because there's just one more example I want to share with you.
You have one question about this.
Yep.
Does the liquid repelling effect have anything to do with density?
Ah, that is a good question. No, it doesn't have anything to do with density. It's all immiscibility. But the reason why the density is a good question, because what happens if you put a less dense liquid on the surface and then you put a more dense liquid on the top? Wouldn't they just change places? But that is what the functionalization is for. Because if you have the right type of chemicals, that bond between the chemicals and that liquid will overcome the density argument. So that liquid, even if it's less dense, will stay in place, even if there's something on top of it. That's why we can have these, we can make oil layers and have them repel water. But that, excellent question, good thinking. Yeah, okay. So I hope that answers the question. If we were in person, I'd ask you if that answered your question, but for now we'll just move on. If it didn't, feel free to add more. Okay, the last thing I want to show you today is actually sticky mollusk nets. So we know that mollusks are actually incredible for cleaning our water. They absolutely go through all of the water in the oceans. They pull out a lot of the particulates and they keep water clean. And there are a lot of different strategies for the way that mollusks do this. But one of the things that's I think is most interesting is the ones that use these sort of sticky nets to be able to do this. They will create this net-like structure and it has this sticky liquid on it. They can then pull water through that net and they can catch very, very tiny particles because they're sticking into that sticky liquid. So they can then take this entire thing and strip off the particles and eat them. So this is something that we're currently looking at in my lab as a source of inspiration, but I would like to ask you, with that 5-second sort of introduction, what do you think we could do that would be bio-inspired by these sticky nets that mollusks use to pull things out of the water? So I'd like to encourage you that this, I actually teach a class on this at the University of Maine. And for the homework assignments for my students, I actually send them home to watch nature documentaries. And based on those nature documentaries, they need to come back with ideas for what new things might be able to be used and applied for new technologies. And then they need to research the physics and the math and the chemistry and the biology behind what nature is doing so that they can really deeply understand what's happening and how they might apply it in engineering. It's a lot of fun to do. And something that's really accessible.
That sounds like a really fun class.
It is. And if any of you out there participating want to come to the University of Maine, you can take that class. The more students I have, the better, because the more students, the more ideas we get. It's fantastic.
So
right.
almost everybody has voted. I'm going to share the results in just about 10 seconds.
Okay. So all of these answers, I'm going to show you one that's particular for a white one, but all of these other answers, if you see a potential connection for how to apply it in that way, then that is absolutely something that could be developed and researched and pursued. There is more than one thing that can be inspired from all of the natural examples that I'm presenting to you. So that's the beauty of bioinspired engineering. All right, so 78% say a better way to filter water. And if that was your answer, you are right for this particular example that I'm about to show you. A better way to filter water. And actually, we're finding that it's not only good for water, but it's good for air too. So what we're doing is we're taking that concept of the liquid on the surface, but instead of putting it on a surface, we're actually putting it on a membrane. And it turns out that when you filter materials through this membrane, you can pull air and water over that liquid surface. The liquid just moves out of the way and clears out the pore. But the materials that are in the air become trapped on the surface because they get embedded within the liquid. So what we can do is filter some dirty air or water for a while and have all that pass and catch on the surface. But then when we stop filtering, when we turn off the air or water flow, what happens is that liquid will flow back into the pores and it will actually push all of the gunk it's picked up to the surface. So we can then take it and strip off that top liquid layer and pull off all of those materials. Now, this is great if you're just looking to clean some air, you can throw that away. But recently what we've been doing is we can then take that material and test it. And we can find out what was in the air in the first place. So when we started with this project, we were applying it to bacteria, things that might be, biothreats, things floating around in the air that could make people sick or people might be using for weapons. But you might see where I'm going with this. Recently, we are starting to look into applying this to the coronavirus, because one of the things that is a big question is, where is it in the air? How much is there? How can we get it out of the air? So by using this, we are working to build a bio-inspired technology that can pull things like this out of the air and then present it back so that we can take it and test it and know what's there. So that's a pretty exciting project that we're working on. So I want to cover one last thing with you today, and that is when bio-inspired engineering doesn't work. Because nature is beautiful and diverse and full of so many wonderful solutions. It may be really tempting to think that anything that nature does is definitely the way to go. But that's really, really not true, and I present you one very well-known example, and that is flying. Right? Airplanes was on our list of bio-inspired technologies. And actually, it's not because people didn't try. People were trying well before George de Mistral came along with his Velcro idea to try and mimic birds in order to get themselves into the air. So that picture you see on the bottom right is an ornithopter, right? That is the machine, for those of you who are into steampunk, that's the machine that just sort of flaps its wings. Those never worked. There were so many different prototypes tried to get that to work, and it never happened. And it turns out that when we actually started looking more into the physics, that it makes a lot of sense why that doesn't happen. So this is a really nice graphic from NASA that it's a little bit simple because there are more components that go into this, but it's talking about what you actually need to get lift. And at the end of the day, it comes down to this, this thrust to weight ratio. In order to get lift up in the air, your thrust to weight ratio has to be above 1. What that means is that if you are really heavy, you need to go really, really, really fast if you want to start going up in the air. So what a bird does, a bird is using its wings both for lift and for thrust. It's pushing itself forward at the same time that it's pushing itself up. It can get away with that because birds are really, really light, but we are not. And so if we're ever going to get into the air, we need to go much, much faster forward than we can ever get with wings. And so once people figured out that in order to fly, we need to decouple the thrust, the going forward, with the lift, the wings, that's when we got it. But it's an example of how nature can be a little bit misleading if you don't really understand the fundamentals, the fundamental science and physics about what's happening there. Right, so that's all I have for you today. So I would like to encourage you that as it's getting warm outside and you're spending time outdoors, to really take a moment to look around you and look at nature with your engineering hat on. See, I wonder how that's working, and I wonder how we might be able to take that and turn it into something that's useful for us. So anyone can do bio-inspired engineering, and it's honestly a ton of fun. And with that, I think I'll finish up. Thank you very much for listening. I'm very happy to answer questions.
That was really, really cool. It might take people a couple minutes to come up with some questions they might want to ask you, but in the meantime, what are the current projects you are working on? I saw the one about the coronavirus and about getting the bacteria off the surfaces so people don't get infected with bacteria in different places. Is that the is that the majority of what you spend your time doing?
Yeah, so we're working on the filtration project. We're working on that with water to be able to pull bacteria out of water and be able to keep membranes cleaner longer. We're just starting to apply it to airborne materials like the coronavirus. We're also working with a collaborator at Notre Dame who does catheter-associated urinary tract infection. This is a really, really, really big problem, especially in our older community, because lots of people need catheters, right? But the longer you leave them in there, the bigger your chance of infection, and it's a pretty significant chance. So she's an expert at that, and so we're collaborating. We're making materials for her. We're actually treating and putting our liquid surface on actual catheters, and she is testing them and finding that they make a really, really big difference because they prevent the bacteria from adhering, but all with non-toxic materials. So probably you've heard about the rise of antibiotics and how people are quite worried as new bacteria keep evolving resistances to the antibiotics that we have. So any solutions that we can start to come up with that don't rely on antibiotics, that use physics, that is something that is exciting. And so this is an example of that. So.
And we did have a question come into the Q&A box. Do birds still use low and high pressure to make lift, or is it the angle of attack?
These are great questions. No, they definitely use low and high pressure because the angle of attack it changes where the low and high pressure are, so it changes where the direction of force is. But yes, that low and high pressure, that's why the bird wings are shaped the way they are. And actually airplanes are bio-inspired in that sense, and that wing shape is mimicked, where you have the roll over the top and then the flat over the bottom. So I hope that answered that question. So I was going to show another example to you, but I ran out of time, of ram horns. So in one of these classes that I was teaching, one of the students actually looked up how rams with their big curly horns can be constantly butting heads, but never get concussions or never really have that much of a problem that we were aware of, because they were big football fans and they know that that's a challenge in the sport right now. So they started to look into this, and they actually found something very cool, and that is the structure of the ram's horns. They have a cortical bone structure. They have a soft sort of hollow center and then a hard outer part. And it turns out that when you have two of those horns on at the same time, that the force will actually be channeled to go outward. The horns will actually move in and out. And because they're equal and opposite forces, the net force is zero. So they are just starting to figure out how that works in terms of physics. Now, figuring out how to get that onto a football helmet, that is the next engineering challenge, but it's a start. The first start is to figure out how nature is doing what it's doing. And then the next step is to figure out how we can copy that with the materials that we have. So, fun things.
I'm always amazed at how many different things engineering tries to find solutions for and what the problems are out there. And I know that some of the people on this webinar, our guests today, are in middle school, early high school, and might be thinking about engineering as a career or a career in the sciences, and hoping that they take all those science classes in middle school and high school to even get them more inspired.
Yep. It can be a lot of fun to get that knowledge, work through those classes. They can be painful when they happen, but you'll walk out of them one day and go, wait, I understand how that works. It's really a nice feeling. So, and then being able to go into research and generating new knowledge, you know, things that nobody really understood before. You could be the person to figure out how it works or what's happening or how to do it. It's my favorite part about being a scientist.
You did mention, I know Jesse's got one more question, but you did mention getting into research and getting into research pretty quickly when you first go to college. How would you recommend somebody think about doing that?
That is an excellent question. And the answer is talk to your professors. It can be intimidating, but it's absolutely 100% the best way to get involved. There might be some who blow you off, but there will be some who are like, oh my goodness, yes, let's work together. Because a good student, someone who is curious, someone who is willing to work hard, someone who is there and wants to think about things with you, those students are worth their weight in gold, and we love to work with them. So the nice thing about science is that it's not always that the person who has been doing it the longest knows the most. Science is all about thinking out of the box and being able to make new connections. And often students are the best people to do that because you haven't had years and years of being sort of put in this little box. So that's why working with students is fabulous. So go talk to your professors. I actually wrote emails to, I think, 10 or 12 different professors doing different things. And all of them said, sorry, we'd like to, but we can't. Sorry, we'd like to, but we can't. Until I came across this professor who studied wood decay fungi. And she's like, it's actually really neat. Will you give it a chance? And most people wouldn't, because most people think that that's not very glamorous. But I'm like, yeah, I really want to work in a lab. It was the best thing ever. Have you ever thought, there are so few organisms on this planet who can actually break down wood. The way that fungi do it is incredible. And it's still not completely understood. There's a lot of things that we can still figure out. And it's going to be really, really important because they are a key in ecology and understanding climate change and making sure that we can help the environment to adapt as quickly as it's going to need to adapt. So when you start really digging into something like that, I think you'll find a lot of potential for getting excited about things you might not have thought you could get excited about. So, but talking to the professors is key.
And we do have a couple of questions that have come in. The first one is, could we make more efficient solar panels by studying trees?
Yes, absolutely. If we could manage to do what trees do, I mean, if you think about it, trees are incredible. They are these magical things that take air and dirt and somehow grow into these huge, enormous, heavy things that can take sunlight and convert it into more biomass. It's just, it's an amazing system. The problem is that the way that trees are able to convert sunlight requires some incredibly precise chemistry. It's actually moving a single electron down a chain. And we have not yet been able to replicate that as precisely as we would need to be able to make real tree-inspired solar panels. But that's definitely the direction that we're going, because solar is becoming more and more and more interesting, and we're slowly getting better at it. So the better we get at it, the more widespread it will become, and the more resources people will be willing to invest to do more research and figure out ways to make them even better. So yes, excellent question. If you could come to college and help us do that, that would be awesome.
And our next question is going back to the ram horn football fans. With the ram horns, is that like how two waves at the same speed can cancel each other out?
Yes, it's that concept. It's Newton's laws, right? Equal and opposite force. That happens in waves, and that happens in bones as well. Yes, way to make that connection. Getting some fabulous questions for this June afternoon. I gotta say, I'm impressed.
I don't see any more questions coming in. Oh, yes, I do. See, I'm always wrong. I always think, I don't know. And then, good. Keep the questions coming. This is great.
Right. We have the question, do I really need to take physics to do any kind of science?
you don't have to, but it's going to be really hard not to. And I've got to tell you that physics can be amazing if you have the right professor. So I also started taking a physics class in college, so it came later, but still it was terrible. I didn't like it, and it was annoying, and it was just all this math, and why do we care about this? And I didn't really learn anything. And then I started taking it with a professor who was really passionate and really good at explaining things and really good at making things clear and helping me to understand why they were the way that they were. And that just made a night and day difference. I started to love physics because it's this thing like, oh, let's understand these ram horns. Oh, let's understand the lift of an airplane. That's really cool stuff. So if you can just bear through it until you get to a professor that can, or a teacher that can really communicate well with you, and then just ring that professor or teacher for all they're worth in terms of knowledge. And I think that will help you get over the physics hump, because once you can start to understand it, it makes things just that much more beautiful. Hope that answers the question. It's so hard not to see you all. So I think they're starting, especially now, they're starting to come up with some good online resources too, that can take a concept and explain it in a way that's accessible and understandable, and also is clear why it's important and interesting. So I'm looking forward to seeing all of the new resources that are coming up with that. And if there's ever a particular topic that just, it seems like it's just not worth it, or it's not interesting, or it's just not clicking, looking around for those resources that will present it from a different point of view might help. I know I actually do that a lot, because part of my job is learning new topics and new things. So I'm constantly learning stuff. And so I use all the resources available to me, and the videos that people are putting out and the written explanations of things. All of that together really helps. And I do use Wikipedia, although I never cite it. I just use it to get familiar with terminology, but I do use Wikipedia. It's always the first question I get in my class. Right, got anything else for me? So I put my email at the bottom of this last slide. I am always very happy to answer questions from students, and we do tours of our building and our labs if you are ever interested and in the area. We're happy to show you around. So please do feel free to reach out to me if you would like to. I'm very happy to talk.
I have found that UMaine Engineering is so welcoming of visitors when we can actually have visitors on campus, and I hope we can again sometime soon. But they are so welcoming, and so many engineering faculty are really happy to show, especially middle and high school aged young people, what they do and how they do it, and how to get involved as well.
Yeah, and there are a lot of programs. Our department puts on one called Consider Engineering in the summers for juniors in high school, I think, maybe. Really a fantastic program. And if you come to visit me, we actually have a paper plant in the middle of our building in Orono. And I forgot when you were asking me about projects in my lab, we have collaborations with paper companies, and we're using paper to be able to do some bio-inspired engineering, some stuff around here. Paper is an incredible resource, biodegradable, you know, renewable. And so being able to use that as a material and then do bio-inspired engineering with it. So I can show you the paper plant.
That would be fantastic. I don't see any other questions coming in. I really want to thank you for coming out and spending some time on this beautiful afternoon with us. I really appreciate it. I am going to do a quick evaluation poll and just thank everybody for coming out today. We are going to do one more of these science cafes for this spring series, and then we're going to take a little break. But next week we do have Dr. Tora Johnson. Dr. Johnson is at the University of Maine, Machias. and she works in the area of, I'm going to share my screen so you can have our website address for more information too. But Dr. Johnson works on geographic information systems and mapping education. And she's going to talk about natural disasters. So if you're into learning about natural disasters, flooding and earthquakes, and other types of things that can go wrong, Dr. Johnson's going to share how she can use GIS mapping to help do some prediction of damage. So I'm really excited about her joining us next week. To learn more about 4-H in Maine, visit our website. We will have some new summer programs coming soon. So about the middle of June, I think those will be available for you to look at and decide what you want to select to become involved in. And just thank you, Dr. Howell, so much for coming out and spending your time with us, and amazing pictures, and what great questions you got today. I'm really impressed.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank all of you for the questions. And I'm seeing that Vanessa was interpreting some of my terminology. Thank you.
It takes a team, and we have a great team here to bring these to everybody. So I appreciate that, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your week.
Thanks. All right.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.